Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Well, from impressing his teacher with his math tricks to wowing audiences all over the world, Marc Paul has created a reputation as a leading mentalist and entertainer. But what is mentalism and how can it be used to benefit your business? Well, that's what we'll be discussing on this morning's interview. But Marc, how did you get into the world of mentalism?
Good morning, Karl. Nice to meet you. I was about 11 years old and I was given a book. It was called How to Develop a Superpower Memory by a New York memory expert called Harry Loren. And it really opened my eyes. It was a book of memory techniques, mnemonic techniques, which I read and it enabled me to pass my exams at school. But there was one thing in there. There was like a lightning calculation stunt. This is where you can sort of do amazing arithmetic in your head. Remember, I'm 11 years old and there was a little stunt and it was how to multiply any two-digit number by 11. And I know as adults we can multiply by 10 and then just add one more of whatever we're multiplying by. But remember, I'm an 11-year-old kid and this was a visual method and I'm a visual learner. So if you imagine you want to multiply, say, the number 72 by 11, you think of a 7 and a 2. So you think of them as individual digits, you add them together, you get 9, and you put it in the middle of the 72. So 792 is the answer, 792. Now, what really sort of drove it home to me was I showed this to my maths teacher the next day after learning it, and she was blown away. And I think that's what opened my eyes to the power of these sort of techniques, mentalism, lightning calculation, memory stunts. They impress people. And I think that's why I went down the sort of show business route, because I impressed my teacher when I was 11.
From there, Marc, you started entertaining kids at youth clubs across the region, and after completing school, you went on to work for 2 years in the bank before moving to London to follow your dream. Shortly after you arrived in London, yourself and 3 other mentalists set up a company called Dynamic Effects. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, we saw there was a gap in the market. It was a time where close-up magic was really not a thing in London. It was just starting. It was very much in its infancy. And yeah, there were close-up magicians doing gigs, but we took a different approach. Our philosophy was to, instead of going direct to a client, the end booker, we would go and find event companies, catering companies, and they would be our client. So by getting in with a catering company, that one client would then give us multiple bookings through the year. And what we could do with bigger events as well. So for example, we used to do a lot of events, in the Great Room at the Grosvenor House. Now that's a huge room and it's normally around about 100 tables. There's 100 tables with 10 people on, that's 1,000 people. So one magician can't do that. You need a team. You need a team of 10 magicians. And that's what our company did. We were able to provide teams. So we were doing big events as well.
A few years later, then, you transitioned into after-dinner slots. What inspired you to do that?
Well, that was really burnout from doing close-up. The close-up scene became so fantastic in London, doing close-up magic at tables, at private events. You could work pretty much every day. You could do multiple events in a day, and particularly at Christmas, you'd be absolutely working your socks off. You just wouldn't stop because there's just so many events in London. It was really, after one Christmas, you sort of finish. I was totally exhausted and just thought, no, I've got to cut back on this. And it was remembering that philosophy of working smarter and not harder. So the prices went up, which cut out a certain level of clientele. And, so we had less bookings, but for more money. And then it was a natural transition from close-up to doing the after-dinner cabarets. Over the course of a year, I think I just did an upsell. I would be booked for a close-up gig and then say, for a little bit extra, I'll do a 10-minute cabaret as well. And in the space of a year, I was just doing the cabaret and the close-up was left behind.
And of course, it was around the same time that Derren Brown arrived on our TV screens. So he introduced the general public to the world of mentalism. How impactful was that?
Well, in the late 90s, there were literally 2 or 3 mentalists in the whole of the UK. And people didn't really know what we did. What's a mentalist? When Derren broke through, that all changed. They knew what a mentalist was, knew what a mind reader was. It's that what Derren Brown is doing on TV. There was also a rather fortuitous television series from America, from NBC, which was called The Mentalist, which was a sort of crime drama, fictitious crime drama, but one of the main characters in it was a mentalist. So you saw he's like an ex-performer that used mentalism skills to sort of find the murderer or whatever. And again, it just made the public more aware of what a mentalist is and what they had to offer. And for me, I think there's a recognition that mentalism is it's a more grown-up form of magic. It engages adults more. It's not a children's type of entertainment. You vanish your silk handkerchief and that can be good for all age ranges, but it's just a visual piece of magic, whereas the mentalism engages on a cerebral level.
How do you define mentalism?
Well, I would say it is the act of doing amazing things with your mind. So it can encompass a number of skills. So it can be, for example, a memory demonstration. It can be a lightning calculation. You do some sort of a mental arithmetic in your mind. But then at its core, it is also displaying skills of reading people. So being able to tell if someone's lying or not. Those sort of people skills. Then we border into the improbable, the idea of mind reading, being able to understand what someone's thinking, and maybe even delve into those emotive areas, like tell someone the name of their childhood sweetheart when they were 12 years old, that type of thing, which invokes a really emotional reaction from the audience. So mentalism encompasses all of those things, and it's very much about people. It's not about the props. There are hardly any props. It's about people. People are the props. People are the show.
How much of a learnable skill is mentalism?
Oh, 100%. If you're good at presenting, if you're good with people, I think that's going to help. There's an old gag that says, everything you've seen me do, a 10-year-old could do with 20 years of practice. And it is true. The fundamentals of mentalism are all very sort of straightforward, and it's then just about honing those skills and developing them. So anybody can do it. It's not some sort of God-given talent. It is something that can be learned, definitely.
What can business people learn from a mentalist?
I think a whole range of topics. I mean, almost mentalism is a sort of metaphor for life, really. I mean, you are, at its core, selling. You're selling the impossible. Now, if you think from a sales point of view, that's a tough sell. You're selling something that is impossible on a fundamental level. So you're learning sales skills. Obviously, some of the techniques that we learn as mentalists, being able to remember people's names, faces, that's a very important business skill. And you can learn these things. You can go online and look up some memory techniques, and you'll get a system for being able to do this. Being able to retain information in any sort of business, I think, is great. But also, we talk in magic about misdirection and direction. And I would say that direction is a core skill in business. Whether you're selling, whether you're presenting, whether you're negotiating, you want to focus your audience, focus the person you're selling to, the people you're talking to, on what is going to make them buy or what is going to be a successful negotiation. You're misdirecting them away from the things you don't want them to look at too much. You want to sell the sizzle. You want to focus on the sizzle. You want to focus on, what you believe is going to push their buttons. So understanding human psychology is going to help as well. And another skill, which is like a little lovely fundamental, is that sort of knowing when someone isn't quite being truthful with you. There are little tells that people give away that, again, you can learn, and that's useful in a business situation just to sort of get a read on the person that you're dealing with.
Many people in business, and myself included, aren't always great when it comes to remembering names. What advice have you got for us?
Well, I think, first of all, pay attention. Sometimes you're introduced to someone, and we live in a day and age where we're introduced, and names are long. There was a Polish lady I was introduced to recently, and her name was Mrs. Karazinski, and you think, well, Now, some people, when they hear that name, they literally close down. They're like, "Oh, I'm never going to remember that." As an English speaker, when you meet someone called Smith, that means something, but then it doesn't mean something. You're familiar with the name Smith, but it doesn't have any visual meaning. So, I would say very quickly, the best advice I can give you is try and make the name visual, because by paying attention and making the name visual in your mind, that is going to stick in your head anyway. So, for example, if you do meet someone called Smith, that's such a generic name, you're likely to forget it. So you could just think of a blacksmith. If you picture that person, banging with a hammer and making horseshoes, that's suddenly a little visual image. And it just takes a second, but it's a second of engagement. So how would you remember, the name Karazinski? Well, you can break that down, and you can break it into what we would call substitute words. So you make substitute words that are visual. So Karazinski is not something you can remember. It's not visual. But you can break it down into carrot on skis. Now you've got this weird visual image of a carrot skiing down a mountain. And maybe instead of the mountain, it's skiing down the person's nose. So you've linked and you've thought about that visual image, and then you've linked it to the person as well. And you're really not... And don't worry, you're not going to call her Mrs. Carrot on skis, because your true memory will remind you it's Karazinski.
There's no shortage of skeptics when it comes to mentalism. How do you approach these people?
Absolutely welcome them. They should be a skeptic. I'm a skeptic. We're all skeptics. Of course, you've got to question things. I think skepticism is a level of engagement. That's great. When I do a show, it's a show. It's for entertainment. I'm not trying to preach to you. I'm not trying to change your religion. I'm trying to entertain you is what I'm doing. So if you're a skeptic, you should come to my show and you should leave as a skeptic. If you're a believer, you should come to the show and you should leave as a believer. I just think along the way, hopefully, you've engaged with it and you've enjoyed it and had a great time with it.
How predictable are we as people?
I would say more than we would like to admit. We are predictable. High percentages of predictable. You can't say 100%, but I would say, 80s, 90% predictable in the things we do. And how can I say that? Because of culture. We've grown up in society that has cultural restraints. So we do act in remarkably similar ways. We don't just do random things. We do things in ways that are predictable. And I can give you, for example, a choice of just imagining a drawing. You make a picture up in your mind. You draw a simple childlike picture. And I know that you're likely to think of probably one of 8 or 9 items. And that's it. And it feels like you have an unlimited free choice of tens of thousands of things you could have drawn. But you don't. You're literally going to, I would say 85% of the population is going to draw one of those 9 items. So that's what makes my job possible.
So what does the future hold for mentalism?
I think there's going to be, there's more young performers coming through. I think there will always be performance mentalism. Slightly resistant to say this, but also, and slightly sad to say this, but I think it's a truth. And that is, I think mentalism and magic probably are going to blend further together as time progresses. If you go back sort of 20 years, there was a very, very, different distinction. Mentalism's very much a different thing from magic. You've got close-up sleight of hand magic. Mentalism is mind reading, telling people what they're thinking, very emotive experience. And I think over the years, they've started to come closer together. So now you'll get a close-up magician that's doing a little bit of mentalism as part of their performance as well. And I think that as time goes by, I think it will blend even more.
And finally, for anyone listening this morning that is interested in a career in mentalism or even in magic more generally, what advice have you got for them?
I think there are so many opportunities nowadays for entertainers that you really can earn a living do this. If anyone tells you you can't earn a living, I believe they're wrong, because there are so many venues. Mentalism is a niche skill. All you've got to do is be prepared to travel. Be prepared to go to those jobs, because those jobs are not going to come to you. You've got to go and be prepared to go to where they are.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.